Hi, everybody. I think it's 4 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining. This is the second session in our personal finance from mystery to mastery session, which is targeted at beginners. So for anyone new to Barossa Club, I'll just spend a few minutes just telling you what we're all about, and then we'll get started into the presentation. But essentially what we stand for here at Barossa Club is the vision that finance is actually very understandable if it's explained properly. And the trouble is that no one explains it properly. There's tons of jargon, there's tons of confusing lingo, and it's not explained on an intuitive level. And as a result, people just don't know how to interact with finance, make personal financial decisions, and they throw their arms up and as a result go to advisors. What we're trying to show you here is that if it's explained well in an intuitive manner, you can empower yourselves to actually take back control and make decisions for yourself. So it's a journey that we're all embarking on, and love to have you guys on board with us. And please email us with any feedback that you have of how we can make this mission happen. We're always looking for suggestions from members. I've got a lot of them already from you guys, so thanks so much for those and keep them coming. So let's get started with the presentation for today. So I'm going to start with a very brief recap of last session in case you missed it. And by the way, all of our sessions are saved on our YouTube channel, so you can always find the past sessions there in case you want to review it. So last time we covered first understanding what personal finance is all about. Why do we care about personal finance? What's the end goal of it? So we learned that it's all about achieving financial independence. And we also learned what financial independence means. It means that you've built up enough savings so that the income generated from those savings more than adequately covers your expenses. So you don't need a salary at that point. So how do we get there? Well, there are 4 pillars to personal finance health, and that's saving, investment, borrowing, and protecting. And we're going to cover each of these in this course together. So last time we began with our first pillar, which is saving. We learned that savings is simply income minus your expenses. And we also learned that if we look at this equation, right, there are 2 ways we can boost our savings. We can increase our income or we can increase our expenses. And we discussed that in the short run, it's a lot easier to control your expenses. It's very hard to go into your boss's office and say, hey, I want a raise, right? But it's pretty easy to say, you know what, I've been eating out too much, let me cook in a little bit more so I can save some money. So our advice is when you're looking to optimize your savings in the short run, focus on expenses, and in the longer run, focus on your income. And we'll discuss a little bit more about that in this session as well. We also learned what budgeting is. So we covered a very simple example of how you can budget. It doesn't need to be very complicated. The key is just spend a little bit of time and look at your expenses and try to monitor them over time. And we also understood what a good target is for your savings rate. So we learned that 30% of your after-tax income is a good savings rate. And we learned why that was also. We worked out a little math to see why people recommend 30% as a good goal to strive for. So what are we going to do in this session? So we're going to build on that base. We're going to keep running with the savings theme a little bit. I'm going to walk you through some tips and traps. And we're specifically going to cover 3 traps that we notice that a lot of people tend to fall into. And the reason they're traps is that they're a little bit counterintuitive. And as a result, we're going to cover exactly how to avoid them and how to stay on the right side of your personal finances. We're also going to discuss how to still enjoy life and pursue your passions while meeting your expense targets. It's very easy to also go on the other end of the pendulum when it comes to saving and get obsessed with saving. But at the end of the day, life is to live. And if you're not, you don't have enough money to pursue your passions, what's the point, right? So we'll also discuss how we think about enjoying while meeting your savings targets. And then we'll give you our final tips and takeaways on the savings topic. And then I'm going to lay the groundwork for our next class, which is going to be how savings leads to investing. And we're going to cover investing and begin talking about investing in our next class, which will be 2 weeks from today. So a lot to cover today. So let's get started. So, when it comes to savings, one may ask the question like, okay, isn't it really easy to save more? I just need to spend less, right? What's the big deal? Why isn't this super easy? Why do we even need to cover this? And the reason comes back to a few traps that we feel like people subconsciously don't understand very well. And so what we want to do is focus on those traps in this session. And once you understand these traps, you'll understand how to look out for them and avoid falling into them. So what are the traps? So at a high level, the traps are threefold. The first is missing the importance of repeat expenses versus large one-off expenses. The second trap is missing the importance of flexibility in your expenses. So we'll talk about this a little bit more and exactly what we mean by flexibility. And the third is missing the traps that retailers, so people that sell products to us, the traps they lay down so that we spend more in their shops. And every big retailer pretty much does this, from Amazon to Flipkart to brick and mortar retailers like Vijay Sales. You'll see these tricks and traps in any kind of organized retail sector that you go into. So it's very important to stay abreast of these traps as you plan your personal finances. So let's talk about the first trap first. So quick question for you. What's more impactful to your savings, right? Your daily coffee at a coffee shop near home, or a one-off celebration dinner with your girlfriend or wife, right? So it's very tempting for us to think it's the one-off celebration dinner. Why? We automatically think about that when it comes to spending. It's a large expense item, right? It's a fancy dinner. The bill for the dinner could be 6,000 rupees if you really go all out and buy some wine and eat at a fancy restaurant. So it automatically gets us to step back and say, hey, uh, I don't want to do too many of these dinners, right? Now, on the other hand, the coffee is very different. We buy it every day. Our check when we buy the coffee is no more than 100 rupees. But we do it every day. So if you actually do the simple math, on your daily coffee, you're spending 100 rupees. And if you do it every day times 365, that's going to give you 36,500 rupees of annual spending on that coffee. And on your celebration dinner, you're doing it once a year, maybe 2 times a year, maybe 3 times a year. But in any case, you're going to just spend 6,000 rupees one time and move on, right? Or 2 times or 3 times and move on. And so the surprising conclusion from this is that maybe we should be worrying a little bit more about our daily spending habits and less about our one-off expenses. Because we don't tend to think of these things because they become habitual. And they're so small every day that we don't really put a lot of mind share into it. So this is one trap that we notice a lot of people falling into. They automatically focus on these expenses and they do a pretty good job of getting these expenses under check. But we need to do the same thing with these expenses. Now, this doesn't mean that if you really enjoy coffee, you shouldn't have your coffee. I love coffee. I drink it every day, So what it means though, is it's easier for waste to creep into your expenses in these kind of categories, the small things you do over and over again. Ask yourself, are you getting value from them? And if you are, keep doing them. If you're not, then maybe look to cut them down over time. So our tip is to fight this bias by periodically paying attention to your repeat expenses and looking for opportunities to cut waste. So when you're doing your budgeting, you may also want to think about these topics. Let's go to the second trap. So this is a really critical topic. It's called expense flexibility. And not a lot of people understand this. Even a lot of advanced financial brains don't understand this topic very well. So what does flexibility mean, right? So it basically means you can bend if you get stressed. Or if you're inflexible, you'll simply break. So the same thing can be applied to our financial well-being. So if we face financial stress, if we have an unexpected medical emergency, or we lose our job, or some calamity occurs, one of our friends needs a loan, do we have the capacity to deal with those changes? And the way we have the capacity to deal with them is if our finances are flexible themselves, if our spending can go up and down and change with our financial health. So that's what we mean by flexibility of the expenses. Can I reduce my expenses when I get bad news? And can I increase my expenses if I get unexpected good news? So let's understand the importance of this with an example. Let's say that you had two people, person A and person B, that were both earning the same amount. They were earning 3 lakhs a month and they had expenses of 2 lakhs per month. So they're both sort of hitting our after tax savings goal. And pretend these are after tax incomes. They're both saving roughly 30% of their after tax income, which is good. But now let's look what happens when these two people lose their jobs. Okay, so we're going to pretend that these two individuals lost their jobs. So their income obviously goes to zero, right? And one person is able to cut down his expenses. They're able to reduce their expenses from 2 lakhs to 75,000 per month. The other person is not able to reduce their expenses much. They're only able to take out 50,000 rupees. So their expenses only go down to 1.5 lakhs. Let's look at the implications of being out of a job for this person. Person A is only taking a monthly hit of 75,000 rupees for each month that the person is out of a job. Person B is taking a hit of 1.5 lakhs. So almost double the hit every month that that person is without a job. So we can see that if you're able to take your expenses down when you get bad news, you're able to cushion yourself from loss in a much more effective manner. And this de-risks you quite a bit financially. So let's now explore this a little bit deeper. What kind of expenses are flexible and what kind of expenses are inflexible? So if you remember when we did our budgeting exercise in the last video session, I broke out a specific type of expense category called fixed expenses. And the reason we broke those out is that fixed expenses are very inflexible. And these are the kind of expense categories you want to be very careful about monitoring and entering into new fixed expenses because they're inflexible. They're very hard to change. So how do you recognize a fixed expense? So there are really three characteristics that fixed expense generally has. One is it's relatively constant. It doesn't change much from period to period. Second, it doesn't depend on your daily decisions. Okay. And the third is you tend to pay it monthly or annually, right? You don't tend to pay it every day. So what are some examples of these? So let's take rent, right? Or your housing EMI, right? So it's relatively constant. You pay the same amount every month. It doesn't depend on your daily decisions. You can't change your apartment on a daily basis. And you tend to pay it monthly, right? And another example is your vehicle expenses, your auto loan, your auto insurance, your gas money, all of these things that are basically do not depend on your day-to-day decisions. Sure, your gas money may depend on how much you drive on a day-to-day basis, but you have to go to and from work, as an example. Your utilities, TV, internet, electricity, all those things, right? And there are more that you may not be thinking of. Your tuition, gym memberships, all these things that are subscriptions, right? These are all examples of fixed expenses. So why are they so dangerous? So one is they're inflexible because it's hard to change them, right? If I lose my job and I realize I can't afford my apartment rent anymore, I've entered into a long-term lease. I still have 6 months, let's say, to pay of my rent. So I have to first find someone that's willing to take over that lease, and only then I can lower my expense. So that's how they tend to be inflexible. And it's also easy for us to forget about these expenses because we tend to have them on auto pays, right? You'll have a mandate set up at your bank, so your rent is paid automatically every month. Your electricity bills are paid automatically. So they're also prone to waste in the same way that electricity, that our daily coffee could be prone to waste because we don't tend to think about it. So what's the remedy? What do we recommend for these fixed expense categories? The first is review them. Constantly review them in your budgeting to make sure that your fixed expense ratio is not too high. So we recommend that your fixed expenses should be no higher than 50% for sure of your expenses, and typically in the 40% range. Don't worry if you're not there yet. Like we said, you can chip away at this over time to meet your spending goals. But that's a good target to aim for. Eliminate waste. So if you find, like, for example, I was paying for a gym membership, and we all want to think we're going to go to the gym, right? It's something that we should be doing. But when I realistically looked at it, I wasn't going to the gym, right? So no matter how good it is for me, if I'm not actually using it, the best thing to do is cancel that gym membership, eliminate that fixed cost, and move on. Don't overstretch on these. So when you're in the market for an apartment or a car, don't ask yourself, what's the most expensive car I can afford? We recommend you do the reverse. What is the cheapest car I'll be happy with? What is the cheapest flat I will be happy with? Because that's going to give you more financial flexibility in case things go wrong later. Also, understand the cancellation policies. So understand your rent agreement, understand how long a lease you're signing for, understand if there are any break penalties, understand how you can get out of these fixed expenses. Understand, for example, if you get into a gym membership, uh, is there a cancellation fee, right? Understanding these when you enter into the expense in the first place will give you a good understanding of how painful it will be to get out of them. And have realistic goals. Addressing your fixed expenses is difficult. It'll take time. So don't expect to lower your fixed expenses, for example, from 60% to 40% overnight. It's going to take time. But when you do it, you will be rewarded with having a much more resilient financial profile that will be able to handle risk a lot better. So that's our advice on the fixed expense side. The third trap. So how retailers trick you, right? So it's good to think of shopping as a kind of tug of war. And on the one side, you have your wallet and purse, and on the other side, you have the retailer. And the retailer is trying to get as much cash out of your wallet as they can because that's their business. They're in the business of selling. And the better they can sell, the better they're able to do it. So when we see Amazon.com, for example, this is a very good example. It's such a wonderful site. They have such great recommendations. People that like this product also bought this product. They have great deals. But all of these things, right, are ways for Amazon to get you to buy more products than you would have bought otherwise. So what are the kind of common tricks that we see? One is discount offers, right? A lot of people think, oh, this product's on discount, so I'm going to buy it, right? EMI offers, sometimes even zero interest EMI. So this is a way for you to buy a product you couldn't afford. You can buy it on an EMI. And you have salespeople and hidden biases. So someone will tell you, don't buy this TV, buy this TV, right? Because they want to sell you that TV. So what's our advice? So first of all, don't buy something just because it's on discount. If you are anyway going to buy the product, then wait for a discount and then buy it. That's a great strategy. But just because you're getting a good deal on something doesn't mean you have to buy it, right? You can always say, I didn't need this, so I'm not going to buy it. Sometimes you get tricked into thinking, hey, I'm getting a good deal, might as well buy it. That's a bad way to overspend. The next is stay away from borrowing to fund consumption. While it's tempting to opt for a zero interest EMI, right? Because you're not paying any fee on that EMI, it's a very easy way for you to buy something that you can't afford. So let's say you wanted a flat screen TV and you got a great EMI deal on it. And so you took the TV on EMI. The reality is, if you could not afford to buy that big screen without borrowing, then you should not probably buy it with borrowing. You can sometimes do this once in a while, but we recommend for your financial health, just stay away from borrowing to fund consumption. It's a bad habit to get into. The third is do your own research before going into the shop. Salespeople are going to recommend products that they want to sell to you. Now with the internet, it's very easy for us to do our own homework and research before going in, so we make the right decisions in terms of what we're going to buy. Okay, so now we've covered the three kind of big traps that we see people falling into. There's another trap that I sometimes see on the reverse side, which is people that get too obsessed with hitting your savings targets and forget that part of life is also living life. So the goal of expense management is eliminating waste. That's it. It's not eliminating enjoyment, right? Once you hit your savings target, right, you're sorted. And basically, once you've eliminated waste from your life, you're sorted. So the goal is not to completely cut your spending to the bone, right? The goal is to um, take out expenses which you don't value. You know, if I'm running my AC all day long and, you know, I've never tried using a fan, then maybe it would be good for me to try a fan once in a while to see if I don't mind using a fan, right? That's a way to cut waste. But to say I'm not going to use a fan, I'm not going to use an AC, I'm just going to suffer, so my electricity bill is low, that's an example of going overboard. So what are our guidelines as we live our lives? First of all, everyone's different. These are guidelines, they're not hard and fast rules, right? So if I love cars as an example, cars are fixed expenses as we covered earlier, right? And our rule said try to keep your fixed expenses low. But I really, really love cars and I really love racing. And I want to drive a really nice car because I love it, right? Should I deprive myself of that car? Absolutely not. If this is a passion for you and you really want to do it, do it. But make a compromise in another fixed expense category. If I'm going to buy that car, I'm going to live in a cheaper flat, right? That's a great way to keep your financial health in balance. So it's all about making compromises and living in balance and making sure you don't rack up too many expenses. That's what budgeting is. It's not about depriving enjoyment. Okay. So what about the other side of the equation? So all we've been talking about is sort of expenses. What about income? So income is a very good area to be focused on in the longer run. And it's something that people don't tend to think of because they really feel it's out of their control. And while it may be out of your control in the short run, if you invest in yourself and make yourself more skillful, learn things, focus on your career, you can accelerate your career progression and earn more money over your career than you would have otherwise. It takes time for these investments to pay off, but if you do it in a very structured way, eventually these investments will pay off. So, you know, I think a lot of young people see this in their careers, that in their first job, if they do a really good job, it helps them get a really good second job. It helps them get a really good third job. And so that's kind of what I mean. If you focus on doing a good job now, you can snowball it into earning a lot more down the line. So how do we do this? So nowadays with the internet, like you're coming on for a Zoom session to learn about personal finance, there's so many tools available for people to learn skills they never thought possible. So I, as an example, decided I want to learn a little bit of Python programming language, right? Because I thought maybe it'd be useful for me to build some tools for members, etc. So I found resources for free. I didn't pay anything for a class and I learned a little bit of Python programming, right? And similarly, there are things for every kind of skill. So we recommend checking those resources out on the internet. And then the second thing is, these days, it's also easier to earn supplemental income than it's ever been before. So whether it's, you know, investing in a vehicle and hiring an Uber driver to drive it for you and earning some money on it, you can look at side businesses like that. You can look at ways to sell products online. You can look at various streams to earn extra money. So we recommend people also think about taking advantage of the new gig economy in ways that they can add some income into their households. Okay, so let's just focus on one last takeaway slide on optimizing your savings in 3 easy steps. And then we'll discuss one other pro tip that we have, and we'll move to in laying the groundwork for investing. So what's our final takeaway advice on savings? So first of all, review your savings and expenses monthly. Get in the habit of budgeting, right? Focus on looking out for the 3 non-obvious traps that we discussed: repeat expenses, flexibility, and retailers' traps and tricks. And don't get too carried away. Focus on enjoying life while eliminating waste. And the target that we're all aiming for is we want our savings rate to be higher than 30% of our after-tax income. We're not going to freak out if it's not. This is a long-term goal of ours, and we're going to manage our finances so we eventually get there, right? And what tools do I recommend that can help? So first is, I recommend that when you guys start out, just note it down in Excel or a little diary of yours. It is better for you to go through the hard work of doing it yourself because you'll internalize it. Once you're a pro, you can look at a tool like Walnut. So if you have an Android phone, what Walnut does is it automatically reads your SMSs and stitches together a spending habit, a spending report for you. Because every time we spend now, we get an SMS alert. So it's a great way for us to keep tabs on our spending once we're experts. But while we're becoming experts, it's really good to go through the hard work of actually doing it yourself, because it'll build that intuition in your mind. So that's our final kind of recommendations on savings. Before we move to laying the groundwork for investing, one last tip is that we have found in our financial lives at Barossa Club that simplification makes life easier. So why is one credit card not enough? Why do I need more than one bank account, right? So asking yourself these questions and using as few products as possible makes it easier for you to stay on top of everything. So that's one of our pro tips. So it's important to track all these things. The more things you have to track, the more complicated your life gets. So our recommendation is keep it simple. Okay, so now I would like to lay the groundwork for investing. But before doing that, before we get into investing in our next class, I want to ask you a very simple question, which a lot of people probably haven't asked or answered. And that's, why do we even earn money on our savings, right? Where is this money coming from? Why do I get a savings? Why do I get an interest rate when I put my money in a savings account, right? So really what it is that the economy has two kinds of people, right? They're the people that have excess money, i.e. savings that are sitting in their bank account, right? And then people that need money. So who are these people? Well, let's take a few examples. Person A needs money to expand his shop. His business is growing. He wants to buy another shop, right? Person B needs money to cover a medical emergency. Person C needs money to fund education, right? So while there's some people that have money, there's some people that need money, right? And because there's this need for money and you have it, you're able to charge a fee for someone to borrow or use your money to invest in themselves or their businesses. So this is really why we have the opportunity to invest. You have done the hard work of earning excess money and keeping it away in your account. That excess money has value to people, and now you are monetizing that value, right? So when we think about investing, having that framework in mind is going to be very helpful. What are we actually doing? We're going to be thinking about how we are going to deploy our savings so that we maximize the fee that we earn from people who need our money, while limiting the risk that we're taking, giving them that money, right? So if we go back to this example, if I give person A money to expand his shop and he's a bad person, he can just take my money and never pay it back, right? So I'm taking a risk. Whenever I'm giving my money, I'm taking a risk. So as investors, we are balancing two things. How much are we earning for giving them our savings, and how much risk are we taking that they won't pay us back? So that's kind of the framework that I want you guys to think about in preparation for our next class, which will lay the groundwork on investing. So that's it for this time. More next time. And I hope this session was helpful for you all. And with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A.
Yeah. So there's a couple of questions. The first question is, renting a house more flexible than buying a house? And, someone else asked in continuation with that, is in the same vein, is owning a vehicle, what about owning a vehicle versus Uber and Ola?
Yes, great questions. So let's start with the renting versus buying. So we'll cover more about renting versus buying as we move on in our beginner series. We'll actually probably do a session on buying versus renting at some point as we get a little more advanced. But I think the question shows a deep level of understanding of what flexibility is, because buying something is a deeper commitment to that asset, right? When I rent something, I'm generally forming a temporary relationship with that entity. So if I've rented an apartment, I may have signed a 1-year lease, in which case I'm committing for a period of 12 months, I'm going to pay the rent, right? when I'm buying a property, I'm forming a lifelong relationship with that property unless I sell it, right? So the only way I can terminate that relationship is eventually sell that property. So because of the very simple fact that my relationship commitment is very different in renting and buying, you can tell that one is going to be much more flexible than the other, right? Let's take the example of buying a property versus renting a property today. So let's say that I bought a very expensive property. I really stretched and I could barely afford it. And I bought this really expensive place in a fancy area. And my brother did the same thing, but he did it on rent. COVID hit, both of us lost our jobs, right? And now I'm struggling to pay my mortgage, right? And my brother's struggling to pay his rent, right? Now, is it easier for me in the COVID situation to sell my property for what I paid for it? Or is it easier for my brother to find someone to take over his lease? Obviously, it's easier for my brother to find someone to take over his lease, right? Because in a bad market, it's going to be very hard for me to find someone who's going to want to pay the same price I did for my real estate. And it's harder to sell a property than it is to find a renter who's going to take it over. So definitely renting has higher flexibility than buying a property. Um, Particularly when you financed it with a mortgage. If you bought it in cash and you don't have a mortgage, then it complicates the issue a little bit. But if you're mortgaging to buy a house, definitely the renting scenario would have more flexibility. Now, on the driving versus Uber, Ola, great question. So I actually don't own a car for precisely this reason. To me, the inflexibility that comes with owning a car was not worth it, right? I did not want to take on the headache of having a car, making the payments on the car, buying insurance, maintaining the car. And I realized that I didn't drive enough for me to need a car, right? So I could always use Uber and Olas to do it. And I would never have the headache of having a car. So Uber, Olas are definitely more flexible. And if you run the math out also, you can see if they're more cost effective or not. For certain situations, Uber, Olas can be more cost effective. For certain situations, owning a car would be more cost effective. But in terms of flexibility, the Uber, Ola model is much more flexible.
Okay, so I think you touched upon this. Is buying a car on loan better than buying a car, paying for it in full?
So I didn't actually touch on that. We'll do some work on that later. So table that question for now. The short answer is, in our view, it's not a good idea to buy a car on loan. There are always exceptions to this. It's not a disaster, and by no means does it mean that you should never buy a car on loan or anything like that. But if we're just looking at it from a pure finance principle, when you buy something on loan, you want that asset to increase in value over time because you're paying money on your loan in the form of interest. So if I buy a house, right, and I expect the value of that house to rise faster than my interest on my loan, I'm going to make money. With a car, it's almost guaranteed that you will lose money over time because the car loses value over time because no one wants to buy a old car, they want to buy a new car. So as a result, what you're doing is you're borrowing to buy an asset that's losing value over time. And that's generally not a good idea. And also, if you remember the advice that we gave on the retailer example, we think it's never a good idea to buy something you can't afford. And buying on EMI, in the case of a car, sometimes allows you to do that. Table that question. We'll do a more detailed discussion of that later. In our view, better to avoid buying on loan.
Okay, so one way to increase income is increasing your investing income. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. So as we'll see in the next segment, when we focus on investing, the bulk of your earnings when you first start your career will be salary. But what you'll see later in life is that your salary income was very useful for you to build your reserves of savings. But at a certain point, your ability to generate income from your investments will be far greater than your salary. And this is the magic that really allows people to get financially independent. So yes, very good point. And that's kind of the direction we'll be moving in.
Okay, so in the current situation, self-professionals have been impacted on the income front. This is a comment.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So not just self-employed professionals, but even salaried people have been impacted and will be increasingly impacted because layoffs are now rippling through in the market. But yes, it's a very challenging time for everyone, and it's a great time to be focusing on things like this. How can I position my finances in a way that I can get through this time and any future times like this, right? Because what we want to do in finance is not just enjoy the good times, we also want to insure against the bad times, right? It's really important that we save money for rainy days like we're experiencing now. Hopefully it'll be a short rainy day, but it's definitely a tough period we're all going through.
Okay, does Walnut, so Walnut will not track cash expenses, or does it?
So, to be honest, I don't use Walnut because I don't have an I don't have an Android phone. I use an iOS phone, so it doesn't work on my phone. But my understanding is that it'll also work with cash transactions. It will not know what you spent on, but it will know that you withdrew money from your account because you'll get an SMS saying that you withdrew money from your account. So it will capture that expense. It just won't know that, hey, I spent that on a Subway sandwich, or I spent it on a gas bill, or, that level of detail won't be there for cash transactions.
Okay. With volatile stock markets, income from that asset class has also impacted, as well as salaries and retainer fees.
Yes, yes. So yes, companies are hurting. So whether it be banks that have cut their dividends, right, to zero, or companies outside of banking that have cut their dividends, I think income streams are drying up. I think the important thing is that whenever you're looking at stocks, and we'll discuss this as we get more into investing, you have to have a long time horizon on stock investing. And the most dangerous thing you can do is to put short-term money into the stock market, because in the short run, stocks can fall a lot, right? As kind of what we're seeing now. So we'll cover more of these kind of issues in the next few classes.
Okay, so does Walnut need us to send SMS, to link our SMS services to the app, which I feel is very risky from the point of view of secrecy and is prone to hacking and misuse?
Yeah.
Does Bharosa plan on launching a budgeting app?
So, wow, this is a very you're reading our mind. We actually have so I mentioned I learned Python earlier. So one of the things I was using Python to do was build a budgeting app that's easy to use and things. It's not quite ready for launch. We're still a little bit of ways from getting it out there for our members, but it'll give you a very simple way for you to budget and keep track of your expenses. And it won't be very high frills or anything. It won't read your SMSs. It won't do any of that. It'll require work on your part, but it'll just make it easier for you on a phone to put in your budget. So look out for that, members. In the next, I'd say probably month and a half or so, we should be able to get it out there and live. And if anyone's interested on beta testing that for us, would love to have you do it. Reach out to advisory@bharosaclub.com to do it. In terms of the specific questions on Walnut regarding SMS and privacy and all these things, it does depend on your reading your SMS history. If you have privacy concerns, as a lot of people legitimately do, it's not a product you should be using. If you're comfortable with them reading your SMSs and you trust the company and you trust that data is secure, then it's a product you can use. It's backed by a reputable company. The company is called Capital Float that owns Walnut. It's a very reputable company. So I don't believe that there's any sort of intent to wrongdo. But there's always that possibility of hacking and all those things. So very good question that was asked.
Okay, Walnut versus Intuit, what's the difference?
To be honest, I've not looked at Intuit's offering in a lot of detail. I don't know, Sanjay, have you looked into Intuit's offering here?
Well, I know we used Intuit when we were Quicken actually, but
No,
Yeah,
I haven't looked at Intuit in India, so I think we'll pass on that question.
yeah, but we'll check it out. Thanks for the suggestion. We'll look at it, and if we think it's good for members, we'll add it as a recommendation on our site.
okay, with regard to savings option, what is your thought process on NPS? Sanjay, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so there are fair amount of savings options where you can lock up your money. So public provident fund, NPS, fixed deposits of longer tenors, taxable or tax-free bonds. So it's always a trade-off between whether you want to lock up your money, maybe for a higher rate. NPS also has some of these balanced kind of things which automatically change your allocation to debt or equity based on your age. So there are all these things. Um, so at least my personal bias is that I don't like locking up things, and I don't like ceding control to someone else to manage things based on my age and things like that.
So let me jump in here real quick. I think whenever it comes to investment advice, one size does not fit all. And this is a really important thing for all of us to understand. And that's the problem that we see with the advisory model currently that's being used for most people. You go to an advisor, you ask them, hey, tell me what I should invest in, and they'll tell you, right? The reality is that, Sanjay is saying, he doesn't like lockups, right? For someone else, a lockup could be something that's fine for them to deal with. So what we're going to try and do in this series is to give you the sort of key thought processes that you should be thinking about. What are the limitations of locking up your money? What are the risks of doing that, right? What do you need to think about in terms of the rate of return you're getting and how long you're locking up your money? What are the risks you're taking in each of these investments, right? Once you have an understanding of these things, whatever investment option you come across, you'll have a framework for putting it through and understanding, is this right for me, right? So, I think it's important to not take anyone's advice on is NPS good or PPF good or not, just at face value. Really do your own thinking, and the goal of this class will be to show you how to do that thinking. So stay tuned on more tools about how to do this. We'll re-engage on the NPS question when we start getting into investing.
Okay, so Walnut does have a provision to enter manually the expenses. Rajan, for your question on, feeling insecure about reading your SMSs, you can also manually input them. And also to answer the question on, is there any website that can be used to build your app for budgeting? I think the best thing that an individual can use on their own is Excel for your own budget.
Absolutely. My budgeting is all done on Excel for myself because I have yet to see something more powerful than Excel. And so for people that are comfortable using Excel, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, just one thing on the privacy and SMS. While Walnut may have the ability to enter your expenses manually, it may still require you to give SMS reading control. So we don't know enough about the Walnut app.
Yeah, just study it a bit. As we've discussed, we don't use Walnut. We've heard people that are pretty happy about it, but it doesn't work on our phones, so we haven't even been able to test it. But it's definitely something that you should look into and study and see.
Okay, I think that's it for the questions, folks. So we should end this session.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. For those that aren't members, check out the website, see if it makes sense for you to join. There are a lot of benefits to doing it. And if you're not yet a subscriber of our YouTube channel, hit subscribe on it. It's a great way for you to stay in tune with all of our videos in case you miss a Zoom session and or you don't have the time to join Zoom sessions. It's a great way to still get the content, and that's obviously free. And look forward to future sessions with all of you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.